So you are the founder of Hill Country Barbecue, which I think
Right.
was like the first actual proper barbecue place to open in New York City.
Well, that's some people would say that's true. There's certainly were barbecue places that preceded us that were doing their own version of barbecue, and we're doing it well. I think that we have our own signature way of serving up Texas style barbecue, and really it's an ode to my family roots, which are all from in Texas and Lockhart, Texas specifically. And so what we recreated in New York and Washington D.C. and elsewhere was really an homage to Central Texas style barbecue, which I think there's definitely some truth to the fact that before we came along, I don't think anyone was really doing that in New York, certainly the way that we were doing it.
Well, what have you been doing over the past 2 months?
Seeing a real growth in our pickup and delivery business, which has given us a lot of encouragement. Part of that pivot has had us trying to figure out how to do more. We call it Hill Country at Home, which is crafting offerings that people can order at home that will feed their family or a group, whether it's a family of 4. You can get 3 or 4 meals out of them, by putting stuff in the refrigerator. So we're talking about, vacuum sealing our barbecue and, large core containers of our sides, macaroni and cheese, baked beans, those types of things. And coming up with kits, things that people can make at home. We'll give you the pulled pork, but you gotta, here's the sandwich kit, so you can do everything at home. And so we have a lot of space. So we've converted some of that dining room space to grocery store shelving. And our team has gotten really creative in developing merchandising displays. And we had all this inventory. This was sort of born out of necessity at first, that we wanted to sell, including toilet paper and paper towels and onions and limes and things like that.
And are you delivering things yourself, or your team, or is the third-party delivery people, or what?
We're doing both. We're doing a combination. At our store in Manhattan on 26th Street, we have our own delivery team. We also do work with the third-party platforms. So, because we let go of most of our hourlies, and frankly have had a very difficult time rehiring many of them who are on employment and have incentives either financially or from a health standpoint to stay at home right now. Many of our managers have taken on those delivery responsibilities themselves. So this has been sort of all hands on deck. Our general managers are doing everything from running deliveries to working the pits to making cornbread. I mean, it's kind of been it's been a true kind of team girding for whatever it takes in this moment. And I think probably one of the most rewarding things for me through this has been seeing our team come together in a real time of crisis is really the only, there is no other way to say it.
So for those hourly employees, you said some of them didn't want to come back, and you said part of that is they wanted to stay at home. Maybe they had people they wanted to take care of, or they might have felt uncomfortable going out, but also they're getting more money in unemployment.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. So if you think about sort of between what they're getting in unemployment, at the state level or local level and at the federal level, for many of them, it's more than they would make, or potentially more than they would make in certain positions, in certain roles. And so there has been, I think that's been one of the, perhaps unintended consequences of what was a really well-intended stimulus plan that's also keeping some workers on the sidelines. And by the way, I think there are plenty of reasons why. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the reality is it's been a challenge in a lot of instances for us to get some of those workers back in the current environment.
So what do you think it's going to take for you to be up and running to full capacity? I mean, obviously we have to be allowed to do that. And in New York City, that's probably going to be a while yet.
We had a kind of a Zoom Friday morning call, which we have every week, multiple times a week with our team, we're really starting to think about our focus over the past 2 months has understandably been about what are we doing outside the four walls? How do we pivot our business to be serving guests at home? And we're now starting to think, obviously we're delayed behind a lot of other states that are beginning to reopen now. What is the experience going to look like in our restaurants when we reopen? And how do we begin to think about what the guest experience, what an operating model is going to look like for us? What's going to be, I think safety of our guests and safety of our staff has got to be of primary concern. And I think there are going to be actual things we put in place. And I think also just the perception of safety is so important, right? Our guests have I think the proverbial questions are, when is a guest going to feel like going into a restaurant? How are they going to feel about being served with gloves and masks? When are they going to get on a public transportation again? When are they going to get on an airplane again? How are they going to feel when someone next to them is coughing? These are just unknown. There's a lot of just consumer guest behavior that it's hard to predict. And we don't frankly even know, is it 6 feet? Is it 5 feet? What is the physical barrier or marking that's gonna be allowed for social distancing? So, in the sort of fog of everything that's going on, we're trying to envision what we think will make the most sense. And we're fortunate. I think one of the assets of our business is that we do have large spaces, so we can accommodate. We were never a restaurant that had, like your typical New York City corner restaurant that had, tables jammed together. We've always had these, large tables in a lot of space. So I think that will be an asset for us as we begin to open, whether it's at 25% or 50%. But, there's a lot of questions. Are we going to have will there be an app or on our phone where guests will order when they come in? Is that going to be the safest thing to do? And what's that going to look like? Will we have more servers, or are we going to have less servers? Will there be a line, as Brett, we have kind of a hybrid model where there's a counter that people go up and order. We also have servers that will take orders for food and drinks and desserts. And so, we're asking ourselves this question internally: should we be leaning more into let the guests be at the table, let us bring everything so they don't have to touch anything or do anything, or are they going to feel more comfortable getting up and doing it on their own without a server?
Well, there are some economics questions too, right? Like, I think about 2 days before everything was shut down in New York, restaurants were ordered to reduce their capacity by 50%. And a lot of restaurants said, that's impossible. We cannot make ends meet at only 50% capacity. So when we reopen, traffic's probably going to be a lot less than it was before. You're probably not going to be allowed to open at full capacity. I don't know if you'll be allowed to open at 50% capacity. Some states are starting at 25%. So is that some modeling that you also have to do economically?
Absolutely, Brett. I think that, we can come up with the best, what we think is physical operating model that accommodates the things that we're going to need to do physically in a space for our guests to socially distance, to have, all the protections in place. But that doesn't mean that we have a financial model that is sustainable or even viable. And I will tell you that, we did 50%, before there was a mandate that we had to close, except for delivery and pickup, we had already determined that 50% was not going to fly. It was only for a few days. Now, at that time, I think there was a I don't want to say there was a greater sense of fear or anxiety. I think people were pulling away from restaurants, and there was just an eerie quiet that had kind of landed in our dining rooms as a result of, I think, what people were feeling at the time. I don't know if when we go back to 50%, you have an opposite effect of where people are there's so much pent up demand. People can't wait to get out of their apartments and their homes to go back, or, or if there's also, or if we open up and there's still just this tremendous trepidation. And I think it's going to depend on so many different things. Have you had it? Do you have the antibody? What's your age cohort? And what's your tolerance for risk? Or just, your peace of mind. But as long as we're kind of all looking at each other and considering each other potential viral threats, I can't help but think that that's going to impact our, getting back to normal. To answer your initial question, when do we get back to full capacity? Not until everyone, stops thinking about, the person next to them as a potential threat.
Although the cabin fever is definitely real. I mean, I really have been enjoying my alone time and, staying at home and cooking my own meals, but it's been 2 months now. And as much as I enjoyed it for a while, enough's enough. So, it's hard to say what that balance is going to be. The cabin fever versus the fear of everybody else being a viral threat.
Right. I think you're right. And I think cabin fever, in the colder months in March and April is different than cabin fever in May and June, and certainly, July and August as the weather starts to improve. And I hope obviously that we all do what we need to do to, know that this is a serious, we all know how serious it is, and we got a long road to fight it. But I do think that, for a number of restaurants, look, if you had told me that we could only do 90% capacity before this COVID-19 pandemic, I would have said, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. If we can only be at 90%, if you take 10% of our business away, 50% would have been unprecedented, unheard of, much less 25%. And so to your point, I have to imagine there are plenty of restaurants out there that are going to do the math and say, look, we're better off staying closed, because even if we can make a rent deal on a percentage rent basis, I still have to amortize the costs of certain high expense variable items like my general manager and my chef de cuisine, for instance, over, what would typically be 100% capacity. Now I've still got to do that over 50%. I think that there's a path forward for restaurants that already have some foundation of business in place through takeout and delivery. And if you can look at the 25 or 50% as sort of just additive to that, if you have a sort of a viable business model and you can incrementally add some labor in to accommodate some of those seats, I think that, there is a path that's going to make sense, but it's, we're in uncharted waters.
Well, yeah, and you were saying that you have managed to make ends meet in this modified service model. Has it helped that you've been able to sell cocktails and groceries and stuff?
It has helped. And here, my analogy for how it's helped is, if in a typical restaurant, the way we would look at a guest check was, how can we increase a guest check? You'd say, well, if we can sell a dessert or that one extra round of drinks, well, we don't have that anymore. So if someone goes into will buy a grocery item, which, by the way, a roll of toilet paper, or even 5 rolls of toilet paper doesn't make up for an extra cocktail. But it's sort of like, metaphorically, it's like that extra round of drinks or that dessert that they wouldn't have otherwise ordered. And so being able to sell alcohol, and we've got an array of different, craft beers and bourbons and whiskeys and tequilas. People can buy the bottle, as well as, some great batched craft cocktails that we're selling. There is definitely, we're definitely seeing that there's a market for that. But Brett, I'm just being straight with you. We're probably doing 30 to 35% of the volumes that we would normally be doing this time of year. because our business is so reliant on not just, we have big spaces, we have lots of tables, lots of seats that we're clearly not filling right now, but we're also a type of venue that does a lot of private events, and that business has completely gone away. And as you know, we have live music venues as well, and a very kind of robust bar business. So when you take all of that out of the equation, even though we're doing, probably triple, maybe even quadruple the pickup and delivery sales that we were doing prior to this, it doesn't come close to making up what we were doing previously.
Right. Well, when your dining rooms do open up again, do you think you'll still be selling cocktails to go and groceries and that sort of thing?
I imagine that we will be doing that for some time. And frankly, even before this happened, we had been developing a little bit more of a retail strategy. And one of the things that we're actually planning a remodel of our flagship Hill Country Barbecue Market in Manhattan. And one of the things that we were planning to implement prior to all this happening was an area in the front of the restaurant to act as that we were designing as a little retail area for, not just merchandise, but some of our food products. And actually, we've always had, because of our Texas roots, we've always tried to bring in products so that we import, if you will, from Texas. They're kind of exclusive novelty products, mostly food. And we've always done that. That's always been part of our DNA and our culture. And so that's something that I do think, we're flexing our muscles in different ways. And I think there will be a legacy of retail and groceries that outlives this in our restaurants, for sure.
Yeah, you might as well. And it's interesting how many restaurants have figured out different things that they can do with their space and with their staff, so that, I think the effects of this will be felt for years as restaurants understand how many other things are capable of.
I think absolutely. I agree with you. And look, you're always trying to look for the silver linings and the opportunities that emerge out of adversity. And there's plenty. There will certainly be plenty of them. Some of them we're seeing, some of them we're not going to see for a while. But there are a lot of creative, smart, resourceful people out there in this industry who are going to figure some really, I think, amazing things out. And I've already seen some of them from colleagues of mine who are doing incredible things. And one of the things I hope for most for Hill Country coming out of this is that we are spending this time productively and constructively to come up with a strategy that makes us less dependent on our bricks and mortar and sort of what we're doing within the four walls. And if we are able to develop and implement a strategy that can outlive, far beyond coronavirus, enabling us to again, doing more stuff at home, off premise, whether that's mail order or, who knows what, that's going to only benefit us in the long run.